Today's video is brought to you by XS Sites. I'm out here today preaching the good word of the XS Big Dot site. If you don't like the XS Big Dot site, then you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I started using the big dots because I took a low light force on force class. If you've never had that experience, I could totally see why somebody wouldn't select that site, but it is my go-to site. They offer a whole bunch of other things out there, and XS has been a big time, long time supporter of the channel. So I very much appreciate them supporting the mission here at the VSO Gun Channel. Let's get into the video. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. I've been out for the last couple days on business, and I've got some cool stuff that should be coming your way here pretty soon, so stick tuned to that. But today, what I wanted to do was do a general video as it relates to some of the political turmoil that's going on, specifically using the LDS attack that just happened as sort of a springboarding point for this concept. And I think that you folks are all smart people, and you probably also smell nice, so you guys are going to get this implicitly when I say it, but I know that you're going to have several friends that are just not going to get it. So I'm just going to lay it out, and if it resonates with you, then I would greatly appreciate you hitting all the buttons, interacting with the video, and spreading around so that this message gets out, because I think it's one that does need to. And that is that bad things happen in a diverse country. People don't always get along. People have never gotten along since the beginning of time. There has been murder and various other bad things done, person on person crime. Like this, it's in our nature. And you can say whether that is spiritually motivated or biologically motivated. Personally, I think it's both. I think there's very substantial evidence when it comes to like analogous behaviors in our nearest relatives, like chimpanzees and things like that. We're some of the only species on the planet that conduct war on each other. And I think that there's probably a biological component there, but there's also spiritual and large part of the brain problem there as well that makes humans especially good at that. Regardless of how you justify this is a thing that humans do. It's a thing that humans have always done. And you may not want to hear this, but it is a thing that humans will continue to do in the future. This is part of what we are. It's unfortunate that it's that way, but it is. Denying the facts that are clearly in front of you doesn't do you any good. It makes you maybe feel better about it, but it doesn't actually solve any problems. So in there are many motivations for creating an outgroup and persecuting that outgroup. And that's what we're talking about here. There are many motivations for this, and the trend today seems to be to go out and try to find a political reason to pin it on the other person for the purposes of attaining some kind of moral high ground. And that is wholly destructive to our society. If we are ever going to stop this, then we need to be a little bit more transparent and a little bit more attentive to the things that we are doing with that. Don't get me wrong. There are clear instances of political violence. You can go down the list of the recent scenarios that have happened, right? But the truth of the matter is that not all violence that occurs is politically motivated violence. Just because something happens does not mean that it happened because that person is a conservative or that person is a liberal or whatever. Those things do absolutely happen. The series of ICE attacks, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the attempts on the President of the United States' life, and that list goes on and on and on. Politically motivated attacks. But just because someone does an attack does not necessarily mean that it was politically motivated. We can't, and the byproduct of that is that, unfortunately, when those attacks are attributed to political violence and they aren't politically motivated, people can tell the difference, and people check out when that sort of thing happens. So, for instance, there was an attack that happened I think it was last year. It was either last year or the year before. I feel really bad about this. So to illustrate my point, I looked this up, and I should know this information because this is something that I cover on a regular basis. It's part of my job to know this information. And to illustrate my point, when you try to politicize a clear case of not political violence, people check out. They forget about the details. This person went in and targeted a specific supermarket because it was frequented predominantly by African-American patrons. He was a bigot, and he wanted to kill black people. And they tried to use that to say, look, he's got to be this particular political persuasion, and none of that ended up to be particularly true. In fact, if you use the historical data, you would come to the exact opposite conclusion because, history of the Democrat Party. But he perpetrated the shooting not because he was a leftist or a rightist. He did it because he hated a particular group and he went after him. It was racially motivated, not necessarily politically motivated. If you take a more recent example, the Zarina Zaruska murder, that was not a politically motivated attack. That was a racially motivated attack with the words of the killer himself. And it wasn't violence that was perpetrated against liberal on conservative or conservative on liberal. In fact, Zaruska was pictured with Black Lives Matter paraphernalia in her room. Probably what we would consider in our political spectrum a more left-leaning individual. That was not a politically motivated attack. People have tried to turn that into a politically motivated attack when it was a racially motivated attack. So there can be many motivations for this sort of thing. That doesn't make them okay. What we are specifically focusing on in this country right now, though, is the recent rash of politically motivated attacks. And part of that is I would say on my side, which I am an unabashed conservative, is to use these instances to say, see, we told you that this happens. This fits the narrative, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a lot more nuanced than that. But that is a thing that I personally have engaged in. I believe it to be true, even though there are instances of the inverse happening as well. Not as frequently, I might add, or most recently, but they have happened in the past. Suggesting otherwise is intellectually dishonest. Motivation of the other side of the aisle is to point fingers at various things and say, look, a MAGA righty over here, to try to diffuse the fact that their team's not been batting very good lately. And I'm not saying that either of those is correct. But what I am saying is that when something heinous like this happens and we rush out to point fingers at particular groups for the purposes of gaining that moral high ground, really, you lose a whole lot of folks and the credibility goes out the window. So if we specifically look at this incident that happened most recently, there have been a lot of efforts on both sides to rush to blame the other person. And I would like to dismantle this here today. We'll start with my side. There are several contributions to Act Blue that are allegedly from this individual. And what I would say about that is that normal folks, like you and me, don't do that sort of stuff. Only the fringe people are the folks that contribute to political campaigns, okay? Because the rest of us can afford to eat, let alone give our favored political dissident some money to run their exceptionally lavish campaign. We don't do that sort of stuff. So already, when you see a political contribution, I've never made a political contribution to a political candidate. I'm 38 years old, right? And I probably won't ever do that, right? I've given some money to like Firearms Policy Coalition and Gunners America and stuff like that. But like, even though I really like J.D. Vance, for instance, I've not contributed to his political campaign. I wouldn't do that, right? Because do it yourself, right? I really don't like money in politics at all. So that aside, anyway, being that those were political contributions, that tells me that person is already well into the tank in any particular direction. But when we look at some of the other stuff that is in there, we see that this individual was a veteran, which I'll come back to here in a second. We see that he was pictured at one point in time with a Trump shirt. And I would say, well, as someone who voted for Trump 2 out of the 3 times, just because I voted for him in 2016, I did not vote for him in 2020 because I didn't feel that he earned my vote in 2020. I wrote in Vermin Supreme. Just because somebody at one point in time supports a particular political candidate does not mean that there is continuous congruency there all the way through. So when was that picture taken is a question that I would ask. Just because somebody espouses a particular political ideology at a particular time does not mean it goes all the way through. And the other thing I would say about that is I have like a whole bunch of like National Rifle Association shirts. I hate the National Rifle Association with the burning passion of 1,000 suns. Okay. And you might see a picture of me wearing that thing while I'm like painting or something because I don't care about getting it dirty. But I have those. I've been given them over the years. I never paid for them or anything like that. So just because somebody might have that thing on doesn't necessarily mean that. Then you go into the stuff like, oh, well, you know, he was in the Marine Corps. Since every person that served in the United States military turns out to be an ultra-MAGA conservative. I would say that ultra-MAGA is not a conservative movement. I would call them a populist movement, but I'm using the colloquial terms here, even though they're not really in touch with reality, but, you know, the shorthand today. That would mean that somebody like Pete Buttigieg is an ultra-MAGA, right? Since that works because he was in the military. That means that Tim Walz is an ultra-MAGA, right? Because he was in the military. And there are countless more cases of individuals who have served in our military that turn out to be crazy leftist whack jobs. Okay. So just because somebody is there doesn't mean that. And then they're like, well, you know, he's pictured with guns and he's in camo. And to that, I would say, well, he's in duck hunting camo, which already tells me that he's a FUD, which makes me lean more towards left than right. But, you know, both camps duck hunt because he was pictured with a shotgun. Gavin Newsom shoots trap. So these elements all come together to paint what I would say is an inconclusive picture of political motivation for something like this. And whenever you see something like that, the rule of using the simplest deduction is probably the best. And it is confirmed as of the filming of this video that this person had some, we'll say, poor experiences with the Church of Latter-day Saints. He hated Mormons, and he wanted to kill a bunch of Mormons. So he went and blew up a church full of Mormons. It doesn't have to be a whole lot more complicated than that. And the moral of today's video today is remember, in your rush to point fingers at the particular side that you don't like, even if there is a grain of truth to some of those things, that oftentimes the simplest answer is the most correct one. And not everything is because we are all chronically online people that go out and do things for our political motivations. And when you try to force somebody into one of those boxes when they do a particularly heinous thing for the purposes of demonizing and creating an outgroup of your political opposition, you undermine your credibility to the nth degree. And I would hope that at least my side, I'm not so sure about if the other side is capable of that level of introspection at this point in time, but at least my folks cut the shit. So let's just be better, folks. And that's what I got for you today.